one of the most prolific execution methods used throughout history, and still used in some nations today, is the gallows. Dictators such as Saddam Hussein and terrible war criminals of the Second World War were sent crashing through the gallows in their final moments and minutes, and they suffered different specific styles of hanging. Following World War II, botching US executioner John C. Woods used a standard drop method, and this did not take into account someone's height and weight, and the drop then needed to bring someone's life to an end instantly with a snap neck. In Britain, the long drop was used, and this emerged following the work of William Marwood, who used a longer drop from the trapdoor of the gallows to bring someone's life to an end in a quicker way. Marwood claimed that the method broke a prisoner's neck instantly at the end of the drop, and after his work, subsequent executioners continued to tweak his work. The most prolific executioner after the Second World War from a British perspective was Albert Pierrepoint, a man who was incredibly skilled, and his take on the long drop led to even quicker deaths, and someone could be dead within a matter of seconds of entering an execution chamber. But what was the World War II long drop, and was it one of the most brutal execution methods in history? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Before we look at the application of the long drop during and post-war, the long drop was around in Britain since 1872, and instead of every criminal falling the standard drop, as in the same length, through the trapdoor before the rope snap taut, a person's height and weight was considered to work out the drop needed to ensure that the neck of someone was broken. There had been problems before in which some of the condemned people's heads actually came off as the force was so great when the trap was opened, and careful placement of the eye or the knot of the noose also helped to contribute to a broken neck. Over time, calculations regarding force were made, and the British came up with rules regarding their executioners. In British prisons, for example, they usually had a condemned suite, and this was sometimes even connected to an execution chamber where the gallows was. So for a brief period, the condemned would live in this suite on death row. Trapdoors were usually roughly 15 feet away from a doorway, and there was even sometimes an autopsy room adjacent to the execution chamber. But the man who really, during the Second World War and afterwards, skillfully used a long drop was Albert Pierrepoint. Pierrepoint was a generational executioner, and the practice of executing people had been in his family for a while. Pierrepoint carried out his first execution in December 1932, and he worked as an assistant executioner until he became the lead executioner during World War II in October 1941. He followed the routine established by the Home Office, and he arrived the day before the execution, where he was told the height and weight of the condemned, and he observed the condemned man through a hole in the door to judge his build. Pierrepoint then tested the equipment using a sack that weighed the same as the condemned, and worked out the length of the drop using the Home Office table of drops, and he then left the weighted sack hanging on the rope to make sure that the rope was stretched. On the day of the execution, Pierrepoint and his assistant and 2 prison officers entered the condemned cell at 8 a.m, prepared the man's arms behind his back with a leather strap, and went into the execution chamber. Pierrepoint placed a white hood over the prisoner's head and the noose around his neck. The metal eye through which the rope was then looped was placed under the condemned's left jawbone, meaning that when the prisoner dropped through the trapdoor, his head went back and his spine was broken. Pierrepoint pushed the lever and released the trapdoor, and it took just 12 seconds from when he had entered the condemned man's cell to execute the gangland killer, Antonio Mancini. In most of Pierrepoint's executions, the condemned died from a broken neck, a fracture of their neck in exactly the same way. During World War II, Pierrepoint hanged 15 German spies in this manner inside British prisons, and also US servicemen who had committed capital offences in Britain. During one execution of a German spy, named Karl Richter at Wandsworth Prison, Richter, when Pierrepoint entered the condemned cell, stood up, pushed one of the guards, and charged at a stone wall. He shook his head, and Pierrepoint, despite a struggle, got the leather strap around his wrists, but Richter put up a fight and further chaos took place. When Richter got onto the scaffold, a strap was secured around his ankles, then the white cap and the noose. As Pierrepoint quickly pushed the lever, Richter jumped up, and Pierrepoint could see this had caused the noose to slip, which got stuck under Richter's nose. But the prison medical officer later claimed that it was instant clean death despite this, and Pierrepoint later stated that this was his toughest session on the scaffold during all his career as an executioner. Pierrepoint and his long drop became the most prolific executioner and method in Britain during the 20th century, as he was involved in 433 executions, including those in Europe, but following World War II, this number increased massively. The Allies sought to punish many war criminals who had worked inside of the concentration camps, slaughtered thousands, and who had committed awful and shocking offences. His work took him all around the world, but in Britain Pierrepoint executed many German spies and also traitors. Men such as Lord Haw William Joyce, the Nazi propagandist, and John Amery, who had tried to recruit Brits to join a Nazi SS Legion, were sent crashing through the gallows inside of the British prisons. Pierrepoint even carried out the last execution for treason in Britain, with Theodore Church being sent through the gallows. Even inside of foreign lands, the long drop was used by Pierrepoint. He hanged in total 191 male and 10 female Nazi war criminals at Hamelin Prison, within the British-controlled sector of Germany following World War II. It was seen as impractical to leave each prisoner hanging for a whole hour on the gallows, as was required, so it was suggested that after Pierrepoint had released the drop, that a medical officer would inject 10 cc's of chloroform into the condemned directly into their heart 30 seconds after the drop. It was found that although the prisoners were left unconscious by the drop, that their hearts could beat for up to 25 minutes after. On the 8th of March 1946, Pierrepoint hanged 9 men without injecting chloroform, and the prison doctor listened to their hearts and recorded what happened, and it took between 10 to 15 minutes for heartbeats to cease. Further experiments were carried out at the end of Pierrepoint's nooses. He did also use sometimes double hanging. For example, during the Belsen executions, the women were given a little bit more dignity, and they were hanged individually first, suffering the long drop. But then after this, the men such as Josef Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, and Dr. Fritz Klein were led onto the gallows by Pierrepoint and soldiers, and then the executioner repeated his work twice upon the both men, and then when he was satisfied he released the gallows, and the men plunged together to their deaths on separate ropes. Following the war, Pierrepoint even travelled to Austria to show others how to bring a faster long drop kill. So during World War II, Albert Pierrepoint continued to use the long drop execution method upon condemned war criminals. He was not selected to carry out the Nuremberg executions, but later his views on capital punishment would change. He claimed, "There have been murders since the beginning of time, and we shall go on looking for deterrents until the end of time. If death were a deterrent, I might be expected to know. It is I who face them, last, young lads and girls, working men, grandmothers." And it had not deterred them when they were committed what they were convicted for. The long drop was one of the most prolific execution methods used after World War II. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.